Hey everybody, it's Lynsey G. I'm here on a cold winter's night in December. I have some tea and I have a story for you. I wrote this story over the past few years of working on it here and there, and I finally just finished what I think is probably the last edit. And I would love to share it with you and find out what you think about it. So the story is called Dwayne. It is a short story. It's about 12,500 words long, and it is dark speculative fiction about a person who wakes up to find a monolith sitting in her living room. So, today I'm going to read just the first third of the story. It's a little bit too long to really just sit down and read out loud in one sitting without hurting my voice. So, I'm going to be reading you part one of Dwayne. I hope you enjoy, and let me know what you think. The day Dwayne showed up, I was distracted. I was pondering the meaning of a dream where I'd been publicly naked, but no one had noticed. It might have had to do with the novel I was stuck on, I thought, as I pulled on my ratty old robe over my pajamas. I'd been up till 2 o'clock the night before, staring at the same scene and unable to fix it. Yawning, I stepped over a pile of clothes I kept meaning to put in the hamper and shuffled into the bathroom, and then backed out. There was a huge rock in my living room. I stifled a yelp of surprise and pulled my bathrobe tight. How did that get in here, I wondered. Tall and broad, irregular in shape, and very, very dark gray, it nearly touched the ceiling. The rug beneath it was exactly where I had left it, not pushed to the side or bunched up underneath. There were no scratches on the wood floor nearby, no indication of damage to the house, as far as I could see. I shivered, robe notwithstanding, and sidled around the kitchen island, moving toward my front door, my eyes never leaving the rock. I tried the doorknob, still locked. I opened it and padded out into the yard barefoot, searching for disrupted grass or gravel, broken windows I hadn't noticed from inside, but nothing was out of place. Standing in the yard in the autumn sun, I hoped an explanation would come to me as my heartbeat slowed, but my confusion only deepened. I took a deep breath, then went back inside, scurrying past the rock and taking up a position on the far side of the island. How long has it been standing there? It was sitting in the center of the room serenely, as if it had always been there. I was glad I hadn't gotten around to buying a coffee table yet. This rock would have crushed it. Then again, there was no hole in the ceiling to suggest that it had dropped from above. I wondered, oddly, if I did have a coffee table, if the rock would have gently moved it out of the way rather than smashing it. I shook my head. Rocks don't move things out of the way. Rocks don't move. But I couldn't help noticing that the small pile of mail on the floor by the couch was untouched. So was the pile of books I kept meaning to put back on the shelf. This rock didn't smash anything on its way in. I wet my lips and turned my back to the intruder, considering my options. Should I call the cops? The rock wasn't exactly threatening or trying to steal anything. It wasn't doing anything, actually. And what would the cops do anyway? Put it in cuffs? Protect its head while it got in the car? I turned back around, squared my shoulders, and approached the rock. Its size and presence became more palpable the closer I got. I could even feel a coolness on my palm as I reached toward it. But I didn't touch it. There was just enough room between the rock and my furniture, I saw, to move around its bulk by shuffling sideways. I could access the couch, the TV, and the bookshelf in this way. I could even sit on the couch, if I wanted to stare at the rock and nothing else. Maybe I should call someone? Not the cops, I guessed, but someone, right? Retreating to the bedroom, I put my hair up and threw on my comfy jeans and an old sweater before returning to the kitchen, feeling a little more capable of handling this situation. I poured myself some tea, strong Earl Grey with an extra spoonful of honey this morning because I deserved it, and stared into the living room. Trying to determine how it had gotten inside was fruitless, I knew, but I couldn't let it go. I re-examined every inch of the living room and kitchen from my perch at the kitchen island. Nothing amiss except for the presence of the gigantic fucking rock. Or maybe the boulder? At what point does a rock graduate to boulderhood? I approached it again, making fuzzy measurements in my head. It was far wider than my doorway, and probably taller. Its top was maybe 6 inches from the ceiling. That would make it at least 7 feet high. How will I get it out of here? I wondered. The question broke me out of my reverie, and I texted a few hastily snapped photos to Lynn, my best friend back east, and to my father. Those two were reliable. As I waited for responses and finished my tea, I found myself idly approaching the rock, reaching out, and, before I knew it, making contact with my fingertips. I think part of me expected an electrical shock, something momentous. But no, it felt neither alien nor familiar, just there. I started to move around it, slowly running my hand along its surface. I was struck by how monumentally quiet it was. The stillness traveled up my arm and into my head. There was a crag near the top on the far side from the couch and a wide, shallow pit facing the bookshelf. I spent a few moments investigating these with my hands. Impulsively, I pressed the hollow of my palm against a flat surface and was a little embarrassed by how indulgent it felt. I stepped back, wiping my hands on my jeans self-consciously. A gigantic rock should be muddy, or at least dusty, right? I held my hands up to my face. They were pristine. I backed away. I made and consumed another cup of tea, ignoring the slight nausea caused by so much caffeine on an empty stomach. And then, of course, I tried to move it. I pushed with my hands, I levered my body up under it, bracing myself against the bookshelf and grunting. I kicked it and hurt my foot. Then I made some toast with jam and poured a tall glass of water. Lynn had replied with 2 lines of question marks. My father had called, but I'd been so busy trying to push a boulder around my living room that I hadn't heard it. How the fuck do I get this thing out of here? I asked. I texted Lynn back with more question marks and nibbled my toast as panic started tickling the back of my neck. Refusing to give in to it, I went into my office, closed the door, and did some Googling. And then I called a local moving company, proud of myself for taking action so quickly. It usually takes me days to work up to making an important phone call. Really, any phone call. I knew I'd been too hasty as soon as someone picked up. Hi, I bumbled, took a quick breath, started again. I need a boulder removed from my living room? From inside your living room? She sounded like she'd smoked for many decades. Yes, I gulped before rushing on. It's just that it's really big and I don't think I can... Ma'am, is this a serious inquiry? Yes, I know it's strange, I sputtered, but I woke up today and I found this rock living in my living room, and I don't know how it got here, but a lump formed in my throat and cut me off. My God, I realized, I am scared as hell. So section break right here. I'm going to take a sip of tea. Please excuse me. All right, back in. The woman at the moving company, she said her name was Maggie, gave me some advice, but told me her company couldn't help me. I spent most of the afternoon locked in my office making calls. First, my insurance company, who told me this situation was outside any of their existing policies and therefore not their problem, but that they could consider their ability to help after I had had removal costs appraised. So I called every contracting company Maggie had suggested, looking for someone who could tell me how much they'd charge to move the damn thing. Instead, I was met with more head-scratching. They needed exact measurements, height, width, and weight, to determine whether a wall would have to be removed or the rock dragged out via the roof and a crane. I went back to the kitchen and looked out to the living room again. The rock stared at me. Or was it facing away? How could I tell? Either way, I glared at it for ruining a perfectly nice early autumn day. Then I finally called my dad back. I should have called him first, I knew. Calling him had been on my to-do list for weeks. He'd left a few messages for me over the past month, but it had been hard for me to pick up the phone since Mom died. In true unflappable dad form, he pointed out that the college in my new town was known for its earth sciences department, and that I should be able to find help there. How did dads know this stuff? I called up the university and cajoled a confused undergraduate receptionist into forwarding me to the voicemail of a professor who specialized in rock identification. After hanging up, I munched on a sandwich in my office and felt weirdly proud of the list of phone calls I'd made that day. The morning had been weird as hell, but it had provided a break from my usual routine. Maybe all the excitement would help with the block I'd been hitting on my new novel. The male lead was a complete nonentity. He needed some personality, or this book was just going to flop, but for the life of me, I hadn't been able to figure him out. Maybe this rock was just what I needed to approach the problem differently. I opened up my latest draft and stared out the window at the small poplar tree in my backyard. But try as I might to focus on the book, the rock kept popping into my consciousness instead. The shape of it was burned into the back of my mind, like the afterimage of a bright light when you look away. Its oblong shape, the divot near the top I'd explored earlier, the cool, heavy presence of it radiating the whole way to me on the other side of the house. It was fixating on me, like I was fixating on it. I closed my laptop, grabbed my jacket and messenger bag, walked right past the stone without looking at it, and straight out the door. I spent the afternoon at the coffee shop pretending to work on my manuscript, but actually scrolling social media to distract myself. It had been ages since I'd checked up on some of my East Coast friends, but really I was searching their images for glimpses of Allie. She had never liked having her picture taken, but she sometimes appeared blurrily in the background with that come-and-get-it grin that had lured me in and kept me there for so long. I wrestled with the idea of messaging a few friends to say hi, asking them how they were, using the rock as an opener, working it around to asking about Allie. Instead, I closed the tab, then ordered a pastry as a reward for not openly stalking her. That night, I brought my laptop into the bedroom and closed the door behind me, trying to block out the boulder's there-ness. It edged into my thoughts as I tried to watch an old favorite TV show to soothe myself. I didn't sleep much. The professor came out to see the boulder on Friday. Typical granite from our area, she said, but still, she got excited about its approximate weight. 15 tons. That thing has to weigh at least 30,000 pounds, she said, pointing enthusiastically. I didn't look at the rock, but nodded. I was feeling very over this experience. I hadn't been sleeping well, blocking out the there-ness of the rock in the other room with TV, TikTok, music, white noise generators. But I tossed and turned, anxiety about my book and the boulder gnawing through everything else. And it's just sitting on your floor, she continued. When I didn't respond, she blinked at me through thick glasses, long silver earrings shivering by her neck. But it hasn't broken your floorboards or anything else in your house. It makes no sense. Nothing about this makes sense, I agreed without enthusiasm, as a light bulb buzzed dimly in my mind. It hadn't broken the floorboards. Yet. The geologist crossed her arms. Her tightly curled hair jiggled as she shook her head. I'll be honest, I've heard rumors of rocks appearing in places they shouldn't be, she said. Everyone in my field has. But I'd always written them off as conspiracy theories. I suppressed a sigh and thanked her for her help, allowed her to take a few photos. Told her I'd call I told her I'd call if I learned anything new, and I rushed her out the door. If I didn't get this fucking thing out of my house, the house I had just purchased, it could cause irreparable structural damage. And I'd just be sitting here like an idiot waiting for the insurance company. I gritted my teeth and called a contractor who agreed to put temporary supports under the floor in the living room next morning. Then I scheduled an appointment to have an insurance adjuster take a look the following Monday because, of course, they didn't see this as enough of an emergency to send someone on the weekend. Then I spent the evening trying to write, but mostly listening for the creaking sound of my home falling apart. The contractor didn't take long. There was a lot of banging and whirring and sawing from the crawl space, and then he was wiping off his hands and writing me an invoice. As he was packing up his things, I found myself close to asking him out for a beer. Absolutely not my style. First of all, I'm pretty gay. Second, I live alone and write romance novels. A flirtatious extrovert, I am not. I kept my mouth shut, but after he drove away, I realized that the impulse was more than gratitude or flirtation. I was seriously freaked out by being home alone with this huge rock, but I didn't know what to do about it. I needed friends. As if on cue, my phone pinged. A text from Lynn. I hadn't heard from her since the day the rock arrived, but with a 3-year-old son and a husband working a new job, I reminded myself she had plenty to do besides text me about my weird problems. I opened the text to find a URL along with this message. Is it you? I think you've been hacked, I typed back. But seconds later she replied, no, for real, your rock is on the internet. My stomach churned as I tapped the link. There, on a website called weirdworld.net that looked like it had been designed in the late 90s, was a photo of my rock. Taken in my living room, but not by me. The headline read, College Town Rocked by Mysterious Boulder from Beyond. The article claimed that I, a local resident, was desperate to know how the monolith had gotten here and was turning to the paranormal community for answers. There was a lot of information about the type of granite the boulder was composed of and the size, weight, and volume of the rock, so the geology professor had clearly leaked her photos. No information about me, except for the name of the town I lived in, appeared in the article, so I supposed it didn't matter too much. But as I scrolled through the comments, I realized that I had been so focused on getting the thing removed that I had hardly questioned where it came from. Probably because removal felt possible while arrival felt unknowable, and that, frankly, terrified me. But here, in the comments of weirdworld.net, the origins of my new roommate, I shuddered at the thought, feeling a tendril of the rock's stolid energy snaking into the office from the living room, were wide open for discussion. Aliens were the primary suspects. Most of the commenters believed that the same technology aliens, Greys, used to beam people onto their spaceships could also move rocks into a house. And I was informed they had done it before. Not into a house, but in fields and forests all over the world. That was intriguing, but when I followed the links, I found that the astonishing thing about most of the rocks they were referring to was that they were not composed of stone common to the areas where they were found. Mine very much was, according to the geologist, so scratch that theory off the list. Another was cryptids, but I wasn't convinced that even if Bigfoot or Mothman were lurking in my backyard, and real, that they would be able to get a boulder into my house without causing noticeable damage or at least waking me up. Then came the took too much acid folks, spouting long-winded passages about the ability of the mind to create reality, stuff about ley lines, the fifth dimension, so on. They thought the rock may have always been there, but that I hadn't been able to experience it. Some thought I was a powerful telekinetic who had manifested a blockage from my mind into reality in the form of a boulder. I briefly considered my creative block on the new novel, but these commenters couldn't even spell telekinesis or manifestation correctly. I wasn't sure they could be trusted on such lofty matters. Another sip of tea. Okay. The next day, I woke less worried about the rock. Maybe it was knowing that I'd done what I could to protect my house. Maybe it was the term monolith I'd seen thrown around online. On the one hand, that felt like a lot of responsibility, but on the other hand, it was cool. And even though my experience had been shared without my permission, knowing that other people were thinking about me was comforting, even if they were crackpots. I sat down to write, feeling centered. I wasn't any closer to figuring out the male lead, but as I tapped away at the keyboard, something started to happen. That sense of presence prickled the back of my neck from the living room, and it didn't feel so alien anymore. After a while, I unplugged my laptop and took it with me to the couch, where I curled up and kept writing. Here the words flowed easily. Before my eyes, the male lead began to take shape. He was quiet, thoughtful, and even a little slow-moving for the fiery heroine. He hadn't met the woman who could bring his truly wild nature to life yet. By the time my stomach began yowling a few hours later, I was thinking my readers might enjoy this atypical hero. As I ate, I checked my phone to discover that the rock had gone viral. Well, it was circulating on paranormal sites only, but there were a lot of those, apparently. And there were articles about my new tenant on at least 8 of them. Paranormal Twitter had also taken up theorizing under the hashtag MysteryRock. The insurance adjuster arrived on Monday morning. He was a buttoned-up young man named Cole with a neatly trimmed beard and big eyes. I offered him something to drink as he entered, but his eyes fell on the rock and stayed there. "I call him Dwayne," I said lightly. Cole nodded absently, his hands bringing up his iPad as if to take notes, but he kept staring at the boulder. "You know, because the rock?" Cole wasn't listening. He turned toward me, but his eyes flitted back to the main event every few seconds. "And how did you say this got here?" he asked. I tried not to roll my eyes as I recited the story I had told ad nauseum for nearly a week. I saw his jaw working, but he stayed quiet with his eyes fixed on Dwayne. "I had a geologist out to look at it like your company suggested," I prattled on, fishing in my pocket for the paper I'd written all the numbers on. "And I got a few preliminary estimates on its removal." The numbers snapped Cole out of his reverie. He jotted notes, then began a slow walk around Dwayne's bulk. His contortions were comical as he tried to avoid tripping over my furniture in the tight space. When he'd completed the circuit, he scratched the back of his head with his tablet stylus. "So, to recap, you have a 15-ton standing stone in your living room, and you can't explain how it got here." I shrugged. "If I knew, I'd already have the paperwork filled out for your company to cover removing it. The person on the phone said it doesn't fall under any of your current policies. But clearly it has to be moved. I've already had the floor reinforced, which I would like to be reimbursed for." He looked up at Dwayne again. "This is extremely unusual," he said slowly. "I'm going to have to network with several departments to classify this phenomenon and move things forward from there." Tuesday morning. 1 week since Dwayne had been beamed in from outer space or whatever. Phenomenon. Cole's word had stuck with me, even as I'd curled up on the couch with my laptop after he'd left. I guessed that was a good word for it. Dwayne did go beyond the scope of occurrence or happening or even weird fucking week. I'd written for hours after Cole's departure. Both my hands were a little sore today, and I had a slight tea hangover. Everyone tells me that's not a real thing, but I get them when I'm on a roll with a book, and true to form, I'd been chugging awesome till nearly 8 p.m. So much caffeine left me twitchy and dehydrated, and having ordered cheap Chinese to wash it down didn't help. But I had forgotten to go grocery shopping amidst all the hubbub, so my options were limited. Still, it hardly mattered. The words were roaring into me like a waterfall as the character finally took shape. He was a great listener, it turned out, sometimes so present in a conversation that he made people uncomfortable, especially women who weren't used to such focused attention from a man. The kind of energy was what I lived for as a writer, as a human. I started making lists on scrap paper off to the side, things I would do when the draft was finished, like go out more, meet more local friends, get back in touch with some of my East Coast crew, pick up around the house, go for a drive through the mountains before the leaves fell. Still slightly caffeinated, I had fallen into a fitful sleep around midnight and been met with visions of the stars spinning wildly overhead as I dug into dry dirt and unearthed the metal skeleton of a monster. Of beating my fist against the broad chest of a man without a face who was weirdly wearing my favorite sweatshirt. Now I was nursing my headache with toast and jam, and more black tea. I scrolled on my phone and found that Dwayne was getting more famous. The photo had spread from conspiracy theory shadows into astrological, Wiccan, and even some earth science and archaeology websites. Theories were proliferating as to Dwayne's provenance, and now his spiritual significance for pagan communities. I cackled a little to myself and sipped my tea. My toast seemed like a ridiculous breakfast for someone in possession of such a phenomenon. After a long shower and an internal pep talk, I placed my palm on Dwayne's cool surface and took a deep breath. "Hi, Dwayne." Silence. I chewed on my lip as a flutter took off in my chest and a tingle lit up my fingers. Like I wanted to run, fast. But not in fear, rather in lightness that went beyond relief. "Welcome to my home," I choked out around a lump in my throat that was either a sob or a whoop of joy. I moved my hand over Dwayne's rough surface and let his coolness radiate up my arm, calming my heartbeat and my breath, sucking the tension out of me. "Thank you for choosing me," I whispered. Liquid pooled beneath my eyelashes. The energy shifted over the next few days. I said good morning to Dwayne when I woke up, sat on the couch with my tea, and talked over my plans for the day before I got to work, often right there on the couch. I got back to my meditation practice and found myself more focused than ever. I felt maybe for the first time since I had landed my first book deal that I was living the dream. Oversized sweaters, piping hot tea, a sunny fall day, and me writing a book I was proud of. It was nearly all I'd ever wanted. On Thursday night, I was ready to go out for the first time since he'd arrived. I hadn't even considered it until then. If a boulder could appear in my home while I was sleeping, what might happen if I left the house entirely? But it was time for one of my favorite events, literary trivia at the Rocking Horse Tavern, and I hadn't been for ages. In deference to the introversion of my most literary In deference to the introversion of most literary enthusiasts, it was a solo trivia event, but I had made a few acquaintances after a year of casual conversations. With my newfound energy, it might be time to push them over the line into friends territory. After getting trounced in a contemporary nonfiction-themed evening, I sat in the back with a few regulars. Madeline, who had done the trouncing, asked everyone what they'd been up to. I'd already had a few beers, and "I found a monolith in my living room last week," dropped out of my mouth unbidden. When all I got in response were confused looks, I plowed ahead and recited the whole tale. When I finished, I showed the rapt group some of the articles and my own photos. They offered their own interpretations, and they asked if they could see it for themselves. I had ordered another beer in the meantime, so naturally I said yes. They should all come over to see it as soon as they could. By the time I left, we had planned a Halloween party at my place. It snuck up on me, though. I was really digging into the book now. The central relationship had begun to deepen, but the female lead's inability to slow down for her lover would be a source of conflict. She'd read his detached consideration as disinterest, but little would she know how deeply he cared until he learned to show it to her. Through hot sex, of course. It was edgier than my normal fare, but it also felt real. I was starting to think I'd have the draft finished and off to my editor on time for a change. Meanwhile, Dwayne's presence was starting to feel almost comforting. I'd taken to reading my daily progress to him after I wrapped up for the evening. Reading aloud has always been my first and last self-editing strategy, but only if I'm locked in a room by myself. I had screwed up the courage to read to Allie once, back in the city. She'd said she wanted to help, but taking feedback from a medical researcher turned out to be harder than I had expected. And the fact that Allie, who wanted to date several people at once, thought that she could give feedback on the passionate, monogamous relationship between my characters? No, thank you. But Dwayne had nothing to say. He was patient. I could pause when I noticed errors and make small corrections, then start over again. He didn't mind, and he didn't offer any criticism, just support. Anyway, it wasn't until Lance, the sci-fi nerd of our literary trivia group, texted me back to ask what he should bring to the party that I remembered it was happening in a few days. I panicked and went out to buy party favors, decorations, food, and booze. I hadn't thrown a party in years, and back then I had a partner to help me plan it, a partner who had a zillion friends who all threw parties. She was always full of ideas, so although they were rare, we had thrown some real ragers. Now I was determined to outdo every one of them. That was the idea behind moving here, to prove that I could live as well on my own as I had done with Allie. Better, even. I had never said that out loud, but that evening, as I tidied the house, I came clean to Dwayne. He offered not a word of judgment. Even when I told him how I had let her see other people, how I'd stayed up crying every time she spent the night somewhere else, how I had pretended to like her fuck buddies, Dwayne didn't flinch. He didn't laugh at my pathetic stick around until the rest are gone strategy. I guess when you're as old as a rock, you've seen some things. Heartened by getting that off my chest, I made cupcakes with gummy eyeballs smushed into the icing, and pudding cups that looked like unearthed graves. I taught myself to make bloody brain shots that tasted weird but looked cool. I didn't have time to make a new costume, but I did add to my makeup and accessories for my old Bride of Frankenstein costume, and I thought I looked pretty great. Dwayne seemed to approve, anyway. I was surprised by how many people showed up. I'd never hosted more than 1 or 2 people in the new house, visitors from the city mostly. 24 was nerve-wracking. Most of them were really there just to see Dwayne, but he was a hell of a conversation starter, and having a steady flow of new people to explain him to made hosting pretty easy. By the end of the night, we were all pretty far gone, so perhaps getting out the step stool to decorate Dwayne wasn't the smartest idea. But someone broke out sidewalk chalk, and combined with my spooky streamers and a lot of ingenuity, we turned Dwayne into a rough approximation of Frankenstein. Well, Frankenstein's monster. So many photos were taken with him that I lost count, just as I forgot the names of most of my guests. But after the last of them left, and I sat nursing my spinning head with a glass of water, Wig beside me on the couch, feet propped up on Dwayne's cool side, I knew that none of those guests would forget me. That was new, and exciting, and good. All right, that wraps it up for the first about a third of the story. I'm planning on doing 2 more readings of about this length. They'll probably actually be a little bit shorter. This was kind of a long intro, but I hope that you are enjoying Dwayne so far. If you have any thoughts, please feel free to leave them in the comments. If you have questions, feedback, whatever, comments are great. You can reach out to me also via social media. I am on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as Lynsey G. You can find me in all of those places. And I will be actually live streaming the reading of the second part of this on December 28th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. So if you are watching this before that happens, feel free to drop by my Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/LynseyLag. So thank you all so much for being here. And again, let me know what you think in the comments below. Bye.